It wasn't the lightning that scared me. It was what the lightning revealed, standing in my backyard, looking up at my window. Nightbound Bloodline presents 5 True Thunderstorm Horror Stories. A storm is more than weather. It's a veil thinning, a cosmic static that drowns out the sounds of our world and allows other sounds to be heard. The stories you are about to hear were sent to us by ordinary people who found themselves trapped not just by rain and wind, but by something else that walked in with the tempest. Their accounts are graphic, unsettling, and, they swear, completely true. We begin with our first story, entitled The Roadside Appeasement. Story 1. The Roadside Appeasement. My name's David. It was last October, and I was driving back from a client meeting out in the sticks. It was one of those trips that just bleeds the soul dry. Gray sky, flat fields, and a 2-hour stretch of Tulane blacktop ahead of me. I was running on bad coffee and autopilot. That's when the sky just opened up. Not a gentle rain. This was a biblical downpour. 1 minute the road was clear, the next, my headlights were just carving tunnels through a wall of water. The wipers were on their highest setting, just frantic metronomes fighting a losing battle. I white-knuckled the wheel, leaned forward, and crawled along at maybe 25 miles an hour. The world shrank to the 5 feet of asphalt I could see and the roar of the storm. Then, my engine sputtered. A cold dread, totally different from the storm anxiety, just poured into my gut. The car coughed once, twice, and then the lights on the dash flickered and died. The engine went silent. I coasted to a stop on the narrow, muddy shoulder. Complete, utter blackness. No other cars. No lights from houses. Just me, the drumming rain on the roof, and the occasional lightning flash that showed me endless, empty fields. I called AAA. They said it'd be at least 2 hours. A tow truck in this. Might as well be a week. I was stranded. For the first hour, I just sat there, watching the rain, trying to conserve my phone battery. It was during a particularly bright flash of lightning that I saw it. Across the road, maybe 50 yards down, there was a figure, just standing there on the opposite shoulder. Tall, wearing a long, dark coat that was plastered to its body by the rain. It was just facing the road. My first thought was relief. Another person, maybe another stranded motorist. I blinked, and when the next lightning came, the figure was closer. 30 yards now, still facing the road, not looking at me. Its posture was wrong. Too straight, unnaturally still amidst the wind whipping the tall grass around its legs. I fumbled for my phone, thought about flashing the light, but something stopped me. A primal itch at the base of my skull. Don't signal it. The storm seemed to pause for a second, the rain slackening to a drizzle. In that sudden quiet, I heard it. A sound that wasn't rain. A soft, wet slap, slap, slap. Like someone clapping with soaking wet hands. It was coming from outside my car, on the passenger side. I turned my head, so slowly my neck cracked. There, pressed against the fog glass, was a handprint. A large, splayed handprint, fingers too long. The rainwater on the outside of the window was streaming around it. But it wasn't on the outside. The print was on the inside. My breath froze. The interior of my car was locked dry. I was alone. I stared at the print, at the droplets of moisture inside it, and then I looked back across the road. The figure was gone. A jagged fork of lightning lit up the world like a camera flash. And there it was. It was now on my side of the road, standing right at the edge of my headlight's dead beam, 10 feet from my front bumper. It wasn't wearing a coat. The coat was its own body, long, matted, black fur that hung in dripping ropes. It stood on 2 legs, crouched forward like a man, but shaped all wrong. Its arms were too long, ending in those 2 long fingers that now dragged in the mud. And its face, God, its face. Lightning reflected in 2 solid, pale yellow eyes set deep in a canine snout. But it wasn't a wolf. It was a cruel parody. The mouth was slack, panting, and I could see the gleam of sharp, crowded teeth. Rain streamed over it, and it didn't blink. It tilted its head, And then it took a slow, deliberate step towards my car. That's when the pounding started on my roof. Not the rain. This was a heavy, rhythmic thump. Thump, thump like a fist. Then it was on the hood. A deep dent appeared right above the left headlight with a sickening crunch of metal. I screamed. I scrambled for the keys, twisted them, begging the dead engine to turn over. It just whined. The thing outside took another step, its eyes locked on mine through the windshield. The pounding was everywhere now. Roof, doors, trunk. It was all around me. I was in a metal coffin. I did the only thing my shattered mind could think of. I reached into my briefcase on the passenger seat, my hands trembling so hard I could barely function. I found my lunch from earlier. A half-eaten bag of chips, an apple. I hurled them out the tiny crack in the window I'd opened for air. I threw my pen, my notepad, a handful of change. I was crying, babbling. Take it. Just take it and go. The pounding stopped. The sudden silence was louder than the storm. The rain was just a gentle patter now. I dared to look. The creature was standing over the scattered junk in the mud. It slowly crouched down, its movements all wrong, joints bending in ways that made me nauseous. It picked up the apple. It brought the fruit to its nose, sniffed, and then it took a bite. A slow, deliberate crunch. It didn't look at me again. It just turned, and with my apple in its hand, it loped off into the field on all fours, swallowed by the darkness and the rain. My engine turned over on the first try. The lights blazed on. I didn't wait. I spun tires in the mud and flew down that road. When the tow truck passed me going the other way, I didn't stop. I never reported it. What would I say? I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a hallucination. That thing was real. And I have this theory. Old stories talk about offerings to spirits of the road. I think the storm brought something hungry to the side of that road. And I think it wasn't trying to break in. I think it was knocking. And I paid the toll. David's car was found to have a failed alternator. A simple, mechanical fault. The deep dent on the hood, however, had no explanation his mechanic could provide. It was as if solid steel had been softened like clay and pushed inward by a massive, single force. Story 2. The Thing in the Chimney. My name is Anya. I need to preface this by saying I don't believe in ghosts, monsters, or things that go bump in the night. I believe in anxiety, in overactive imaginations, in sleep paralysis. Or I did. I was at my grandparents' farmhouse. It's this ancient, creaky place full of antique clocks and the smell of old books and wood smoke. A storm rolled in that night. One of those deep, atmospheric pressure storms that makes your ears pop. The wind wasn't just blowing. It was shrieking around the corners of the house, finding every loose shutter to rattle. Every few minutes, a lightning strike would turn the world into a stark, blue-white negative image, freezing the swaying trees in terrifying poses. We lost power just after 9 p.m. My grandparents, unfazed, lit oil lamps and went to bed early. I was left alone in the living room, the circle of lamplight feeling pathetically small against the roaring dark outside. The heart of the house was the old stone fireplace. It was cold, of course, but the storm was breathing down the chimney. A low, mournful howl echoed down the flue, rising and falling with the wind. At first, it was just atmospheric. Spooky, sure, but explainable. Then, the timbre changed. It wasn't a howl of wind anymore. It became a wet sound, a guttural, phlegmy rattling, like something with a chest infection was breathing heavily down a metal pipe. H-H-H-H-K-K-K-K-K-K-K-H-H-H. H-H-H-H-K-K-K-K-K-K-K-H-H-H. It was rhythmic, deliberate. I froze, my book forgotten in my lap. It's the storm, I whispered to myself. It's just a weird acoustic effect. But my skin was crawling. This was a living sound. Then came the scratching. It started at the top, far up in the chimney breast. Slow, hesitant scrapes of something hard on stone. Scritch, scritch, pause, scritch. Then it got faster, more frantic. It was moving down, clawing its way down the inside of the chimney, towards the living room, towards me. I backed away from the hearth, my chair scraping loudly on the wooden floor. The sound in the chimney stopped instantly. The only noise was the storm outside. I stood there, heart hammering, staring at the black mouth of the fireplace. Minutes passed. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath. My mind was racing, building logical cages, a trapped bird, a raccoon, branches scraping. I took a step closer, peering into the darkness. I could smell it then. Cutting through the cozy scent of old ash and wax was a new smell. Dank, musky, like wet fur and old soil. A bolt of lightning struck nearby. The simultaneous thunder was a physical shockwave. And in that split-second flash, I saw it. The fireplace wasn't empty. Crammed into the hearth, folded into the tight, soot-blackened space, was a shape. It was coiled, limbs bent at impossible angles to fit. It was covered in short, dark, slick fur that gleamed in the sudden light. And it was looking right at me. Its eyes were wide, entirely black, like pools of crude oil. No white, no iris. Just perfect, absorbing blackness set in a narrow, pointed face. The light vanished, plunging us back into lamplight. I didn't scream. The sound died in my throat. My body was locked in pure, prehistoric fear. I could hear it moving, unfolding itself from the hearth with a series of soft, wet pops and cracks. It was coming out. I broke. I turned and ran, not upstairs to my grandparents', but to the basement door. It was the closest, heaviest door I could think of. I wrenched it open, flung myself down the steep wooden steps, and slammed it shut behind me, fumbling for the old iron bolt. I slid it home just as something heavy thudded against the other side of the door. I spent the night in the freezing, pitch-black basement, huddled behind my grandfather's workbench. I listened. For hours, I listened to it moving through the house above me. Not walking, dragging. A slow, heavy drag, punctuated by soft, tapping clicks. It would stop outside the basement door sometimes. I could hear it breathing that same wet, rattling breath through the keyhole. Once, I saw one of those black, oily eyes peer through the gap in the doorframe, scanning the darkness for me. It left at dawn. As the storm faded to a drizzle, the sound ceased. The pressure in the house lifted. I waited another hour, my muscles screaming, before I dared to unbolt the door. The living room was a wreck. Furniture was overturned. Deep, parallel gouges were raked into the hardwood floor, starting at the fireplace and trailing off towards the front door, which stood wide open to the gray, wet morning. And everywhere, on the floor, on the overturned chairs, was a trail of thick, viscous mud. But it didn't smell like mud. It smelled like that same wet fur and deep, cold earth. My grandparents slept through it all. They found me in the living room, catatonic. They blamed the storm, said I'd had a night terror. I know what was in that chimney. I know what unfolded itself in my grandparents' living room. It wasn't a nightmare you wake from. It was a thing that climbed down out of the storm, seeking shelter from the rain. And I was in its way. I haven't been back. They think I hate the countryside now. They're not entirely wrong. Anya's grandparents had the chimney professionally cleaned and capped. The workmen found no nests, no animal remains. They did, however, comment on the strange, deep claw marks scoring the interior firebrick, marks that, in their words, looked too big and too sharp for any local wildlife. Story 3. The Lights in the Reed Beds. Name's Leo. I used to be search and rescue. Retired from it now. Not because of my age, but because of what happened during Celia. You have to understand the marsh. The Blackwater Salt Marsh. It's a huge, trackless expanse of channels, mudflats, and 10-foot-tall reeds. At high tide, it's a shallow sea. At low tide, it's a stinking, sucking maze. Locals know to avoid it, especially in a storm. But when the call came in that a couple of amateur photographers had gone in there to capture the fury, my team was activated. Idiots. But they were someone's kids. By the time we geared up, Celia was fully ashore. This wasn't a thunderstorm. It was the end of the world. Rain came in horizontally. The wind sounded like a freight train parked on your roof. We used a high-clearance 4x4, but even that was struggling, the headlights doing little more than illuminating a solid wall of water. We got as far as the old ranger station on the marsh's edge. Beyond that, the access road was under 3 feet of churning, debris-filled water. On foot was suicide, but the protocol is to establish a beacon, wait for a lull. We holed up in the station, a tin-roofed shack that shuddered with every gust. The radio was just static. We were cut off. That's when Sam, my partner, pointed out the window. Lights. Out in the marsh, deep in the reed beds, were pinpricks of light. Not the steady white of a flashlight. These were a faint, sickly greenish yellow. They bobbed and weaved slowly, about a dozen of them, moving in a loose formation. Will-o'-the-wisps. Marsh gas. That was my first logical thought. Methane igniting. It happens. But these didn't flicker like flame. They pulsed. Gently, rhythmically, like they were breathing. And they were moving against the wind. Sam had the binoculars. He went quiet for a long time. When he lowered them, his face was pale under his rain hood. "Leo," he said, his voice tight. "They're not lights. They're attached." I grabbed the binocs. It took me a minute to focus through the sheeting rain. When I did, my blood went cold. The lights were eyes. Each soft, glowing point was set in a dark, humped shape barely visible above the reeds. The shapes were low to the water, moving with a strange, liquid grace. They were the size of large dogs, but their silhouettes were all wrong. Too elongated, necks too sinuous. As one turned its head, the twin lights swung in unison, and I caught the brief, jagged outline of a long, serrated muzzle breaking the water's surface. They weren't swimming. They were waiting, hunting. A sound cut through the storm's roar. Not the wind. A human scream. High-pitched, terrified, and then abruptly cut off. It came from the direction of the lights. Protocol went out the window. We had to move. We radioed in a mayday, grabbed our gear, and plunged into the knee-deep water at the tree line, skirting the marsh proper, trying to circle towards where we'd heard the scream. The water was ice-cold, and every submerged root threatened to break an ankle. The reeds formed a towering, rustling wall to our left, and within it, those glowing eyes moved, keeping pace with us. Then the sound started. Not screams. Mimicry. From the reeds to our left, Sam's voice called out, "Over here. I found one. I need help." But Sam was right beside me, his own face a mask of horror. Then my voice, pleading, my legs trapped. "Leo, don't leave me." The things in the reeds were throwing our own voices back at us, twisted with a wet, gurgling undertone. They were trying to lure us in, to separate us. The worst was the child. A little girl's voice, sobbing, "I'm scared. Please, help me." It was heart-wrenchingly perfect, and it was coming from a dense thicket of reeds where the water was deepest. Sam took a step towards it. I grabbed his arm hard. "It's not real," I snarled, more to convince myself. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "What if it is?" That's when the one in front of us rose up. It didn't come from the reeds. It came up from the water, right in the flooded path ahead. It unfolded to a height of 7 feet, water streaming off a body that was slick, hairless, and gray as a corpse. Its limbs were long and knobbed, webbed fingers ending in claws that gleamed even in the gloom. Its head was a nightmarish blend of frog and human, with a wide, lipless mouth. And from its brow, 2 bulbous, glowing yellow-green eyes cast their sickly light on us. It opened its mouth and let out a sound that wasn't a mimic. It was its own voice, a deep, vibrating croak that shook my ribs. The sound carried a tangible hunger. We fired flares, not at it, but into the air. The sudden, violent red light exploded overhead, painting the marsh in hellish tones. The creature recoiled, hissing, and slipped back beneath the black water. All around us, the glowing eyes in the reeds dimmed and vanished, submerging. We didn't wait. We ran, stumbled, fell, crawled back the way we came. We didn't stop until we collapsed at the ranger station. The storm surge receded 2 days later. They found the photographers' bodies 3 miles inland, washed up in a creek. The coroner listed drowning, but the rescue divers who recovered them, they talked in hushed tones. They said the bodies were covered in long, shallow lacerations, like they'd been dragged through a field of razors. And clutched in one man's hand was a fistful of strange, coarse, gray reeds that none of the botanists could identify. I resigned a week later. I know what I saw. The marsh has its own keepers. And during a storm, when the world is loud and drowning, they come up to the surface to feed. They don't just take your body. They mock your soul on the way down. Leo's official report cited hazardous conditions and probable auditory hallucinations due to stress. His personal log, which he shared with us, contains the sketches he made that night. They are detailed, clinical, and deeply unsettling. Story 4. The Static Passenger. My name is Sophia. I've worked the transcontinental red ice for years. You see a lot. Nervous flyers, drunks, celebrities, love, grief. You become an expert in human behavior at altitude, and you learn that a storm, no matter how bad, is just physics. It's turbulent air. It's nothing to fear. This was Flight 227 over the northern Atlantic. A packed 787, everyone sleeping or trying to. I was in the aft galley, prepping for breakfast service, when we hit the storm cell. Not unusual, but this one, it felt different. The plane didn't just shudder, it groaned. The lights flickered, and for a second, all the in-flight entertainment screens went black. Not off, black, and they stayed that way. Then the static started. It was a low, whispery hiss that came from every speaker, every headphone jack. It wasn't loud, but it was pervasive, itching at the edge of your hearing. And within the static, voices. Not words, just fragments of voices, like a radio scanning through a million dead channels. A laugh here, a sob there, a phrase in a language I've never heard. It was the sound of a crowded room, heard from underwater. The captain came on, his voice strained. Crew, secure the cabin. We're experiencing some severe electrical turbulence. It's going to be a bumpy ride for the next 20 minutes. We did our rounds, checking seatbelts. The passengers were uneasy, wide-eyed. The static was getting to them. That's when I saw him. Seat 34B, an aisle seat. He was just sitting there, staring straight ahead. A man in a dark, old-fashioned suit, the fabric looking oddly thick and woolen. His hair was neatly combed, but it was the gray of television snow. His skin had the same texture. He looked fuzzy, indistinct, like a badly tuned television image of a person. I approached, my professional smile plastered on. Sir, please make sure your seatbelt is securely fastened. He didn't turn. He didn't blink. He just slowly tilted his head up to look at me. His eyes were solid, unblimming screens of that same whispering, shifting static. In their depths, the fragmented voices seemed to swell. I saw a flicker of a screaming face, the silhouette of a falling man, a brief, bright flash of an explosion. My training evaporated. I took a step back. He slowly raised a hand, pointing a finger that seemed to dissolve into visual noise at the edges, towards the window. Outside, in the absolute blackness, a shape kept pace with the wing. It was vast, amorphous, and darker than the surrounding night. It wasn't a cloud. It had a presence, and as lightning flashed within it, not from the sky, but from its core, I saw suggestions of impossible geometry, of structures that hurt my mind to glimpse. The static man's mouth didn't move, but a voice came from him, layered with 1,000 others in that watery hiss. They are watching the storm. They are always watching. The plane gave a violent lurch. An oxygen mask dropped from the ceiling, swinging wildly. I grabbed a seat back to steady myself. When I looked back at 34B, the seat was empty. Not vacated. Empty, as if no one had ever been there. The seatbelt was still neatly fastened across the pristine cushion, but the static remained. It got into everything. The coffee from the brewer tasted of radio static. The food smelled of it. I could feel it in my teeth, a metallic vibration. We landed safely at Heathrow. The ground crew was waiting, not for us, but for the plane. As we disembarked, I saw them with specialized equipment, scanning the fuselage, their faces grim. I asked the captain what was going on. He just shook his head, his own eyes haunted. "We're not the first to hit that patch," was all he'd say. "They call it the static veil." The manifests never matched the passenger count after. I transferred to ground duty the next day. I can't go back up. Not after what I know. The storm wasn't outside the plane. It was a corridor, a doorway, and we flew right through it, carrying something that wasn't on the manifest. Something that showed me that the sky isn't empty. It's full of signals, and some of them are trying to tune into us. Story 5. The Anniversary Storm. I'm Marcus. My father bought the house on Cedar Lane in 1987. It was a foreclosure, a steal, he said. He never wondered why. Every year, like clockwork, on the night of September 18th, a storm would hit. Not a general storm in the area. A hyperlocal, vicious little tempest that sat directly over our house. The weatherman could be predicting clear skies, but at exactly 9:17 p.m., the first drop would hit my bedroom window. By 9:20, it would be a torrent. The wind would scream in one specific note, a high, desperate wail that sounded almost human. And the lightning, it wasn't random. It would strike the same 3 spots in the backyard in the same sequence. Every single year. My parents called it a coincidence, a weird meteorological quirk. I was a kid, it was terrifying, but you normalize anything. The changes started when I was 12. During the anniversary storm, I'd start to smell ozone, sure, but also cigarette smoke and cheap perfume. Since no one in our house used. I'd hear voices underneath the wind's wail, arguing. A man and a woman. They were angry, scared. I could never make out words, just the terrible, rising tension of it. The year I turned 16, I saw her. It was 9:17 p.m. The first drop hit. I was in the living room, pretending the storm didn't bother me. The lights flickered, and in the sudden strobe of a lightning flash, I saw a woman standing in the hallway by the front door. She was wearing a pale yellow dress, soaked through, clinging to her. Her hair was dark and plastered to her face. She was just standing there, looking towards the kitchen, trembling. The light vanished. I turned on the lamp. Nothing. I told my dad. He got that tight, worried look he always got on that night. It's the storm, Marcus. Shadows and imagination. But the next year, I was ready. I had a camcorder. As the storm began, I turned it on and pointed it down the hallway. I watched through the viewfinder. At 9:23 p.m., she appeared. Not in a flash. She just resolved. Like a photograph developing in reverse, from faint to solid. She was there, soaking wet, her back to me. And this time, I heard the voices clearly. They were coming from the kitchen. The man's voice, slurred, furious. "You think you can just leave? With my money." The woman's voice, the woman in the hall, pleading, sobbing. "Please, just let me go. I won't say anything." A crash. The sound of breaking glass. On my tape, the woman in the hallway flinched at the sound. She reached for the front door handle, her hands shaking violently. She couldn't turn it. It was like it was locked from the outside. From the kitchen doorway, a shadow bloomed. Tall, hulking, holding something long and slender, a fireplace poker. The woman in the hall saw it and let out a soundless scream, her hands going to her mouth. The lightning flashed. In that instant, the scene was illuminated with horrific clarity. The man in the kitchen doorway, his face contorted with rage. The woman, frozen in terror. And reflected in the rain-smeared glass of the front door, a third figure. A small child, maybe 4 or 5, crouched on the stairs behind me, watching it all. Then the thunder. It wasn't a rumble. It was a deafening, concussive boom that shook the house to its foundation. The sound was perfectly synchronized with the man in the shadow lunging forward. When my vision cleared, The hallway was empty. The storm outside began to abate. The wind's wail dropping to a whimper, then silence. The tape showed nothing. Just static from 9:17 to 9:24. 7 minutes of hissing gray noise. I became obsessed. I went to the town archives. The previous owner before the foreclosure was a bank. The owner before that, records were sparse. But an old librarian remembered. A couple, the Hendersons. They vanished one night in the late 70s. There was gossip, debt, infidelity. A sudden, quiet move, people said. The house sat empty for years. September 18th was the night they vanished. The final storm was the year I left for college. I was alone in the house. My parents were out. I knew it was coming. I sat on the stairs where the child figure had been. I didn't run a camera. I just witnessed. It played out as it always did. The smells, the voices, the woman appearing in the hall, the shadow with the poker. But this time, as the man lunged, the woman didn't just vanish. She turned her head. She looked right at me, sitting on the stairs. Her eyes were wide with a realization that transcended her own moment of terror. She saw me, the future witness, and in her eyes, I didn't see fear anymore. I saw a desperate, aching plea. Remember me. The thunder boom hit. The house fell silent and still. I sold the house for my parents after they retired. I told the buyers nothing. What would I say? But sometimes, on a calm September night, I check the weather for that town. And I wonder if the new owners have learned to mark their calendar for the 18th. If they hear the wind start to scream in a familiar, human key at exactly 9:17 p.m., the storm isn't a weather pattern. It's an echo, a wound in the atmosphere, replaying the most violent, terrified moment of two people's lives. The house isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by their last storm, and it invites you in to watch. Marcus's research uncovered a final, chilling footnote. In a buried police report from October 1979, it was noted that a severe, isolated thunderstorm had been reported on Cedar Lane on the night of September 18th, despite no storm activity in the wider region. The responding officer found the house empty, the back door open, and a single, rain-soaked yellow scarf lying on the kitchen floor. 5 stories. 5 witnesses who stepped from our world into a moment of storm-born anomaly. A roadside offering to a hungry shape. A chimney-crawling horror seeking shelter. Ancient marsh dwellers who mimic to lure. A static entity hitchhiking in the stratosphere. And a house that faithfully replays its own violent past. The common thread is not merely rain and lightning. It is the storm as a catalyst, a grand disruptor. It scours away the thin veneer of our everyday reality. It drowns out our electronic hum, our civilized noise, and in that primeval silence, older sounds return. It washes clean the familiar paths, revealing the older, stranger trails beneath. These witnesses were not chosen. They were simply caught in the downpour when the veil fluttered. They are mechanics and salesmen, artists and rescuers, teachers and flight attendants. People like you. Their credibility lies in their normality and the profound, permanent scar the experience left upon it. They all end their accounts with the same unshakable conviction. This was real. So the next time the barometric pressure drops and the sky turns the color of a bruise and the first cold drops begin to fall, pay attention. Listen to what the thunder hides. Watch what the lightning reveals. You might just see something that the clear weather keeps politely hidden. If you have a story of something you encountered during a storm, a moment where the lines blurred, we invite you to share it in the comments below. Your experience might be the key to understanding another. If you found yourself held by these accounts, please lend us your support. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. It helps us continue to bring these dark testimonies to light. This has been Nightbound Bloodline. Thank you for listening. Until next time, sleep with one eye open. The end.